in the wake of the Harry and Meghan interview, I've seen a few people say now that it seems crazy to them that Meghan and Harry would move to the U.S. because of racism when we're the most racist country on the planet. And to that I say, you know what? Yes, America is the most racist country on earth, except for every other country. I think the people who say that are speaking out of their privilege. Their American privilege and most of the time their white privilege. Because if you can say that about America, that we're the most racist country on earth, then you've never taken the time to understand any other cultures. You've never taken the time to explore cultures or countries outside of your own. And I'll give you an example. When my son graduated from high school in 2020, before COVID hit, we were looking at sending him overseas to do some English language instruction. It's a thing that a lot of American and Canadian students do. They take a gap year and they go overseas, a lot of times to an Asian country, to teach English for a year and come back with enough money in their pocket to go to college. So we thought it'd be an avenue to explore. And as I was looking up schools in Asian countries, because that's where my son really wanted to teach and explore, I was faced by note after note after note on schools' websites saying, we don't accept African Americans. Some were a little more bold. No black people, please. Some didn't put their descriptions in the job description until I called or emailed, and then we had a discussion and come to find out, well, my son is black. We would prefer to have non-black Americans teach English here. And I assume that's because in most Asian countries, when they're teaching students English, they want to teach them a certain brand of English, an American brand. And to them, American means white and probably blonde and maybe even middle class. And it didn't upset me, but I was certainly miffed. So we gave up on that. But I was really struck by the difference in how the world seems when you're sitting here in America and how it seems when you leave the shores of our country. I thought about my cousin from the inner city who joined the Navy as a young man and telling me about his first trip to Eastern Europe as he first set foot off of his vessel for his first shore leave in Eastern Europe and was immediately greeted by shouts of the N-word and faced that every moment he was in Eastern Europe until he got back on that ship and came home. And that was mere months after he had left the country for the first time and left his home for the first time. I was in London a couple years ago, coincidentally on the same weekend that Harry and Meghan got married. And we think of them as so progressive, but I was faced everywhere with billboards and signs and ads for programs to erase racism, to get rid of racism, talking about empowering people of color. They were dealing with it too. In France, James Baldwin and Langston Hughes, great black writers, they escaped to France in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s because of their progressive culture. They couldn't live freely here as black men, and so they went to France to experience that freedom. Now, 60, 70 years later, France is embroiled in a cultural war that has been exacerbated by the increase in immigration from other countries. They're now embroiled in a war that has been described as racist. There's no place on earth you can go where people aren't judging each other because of how they look. The caste system in India is based on how people look, how dark their skin is. In Asia, the Asian countries are notorious for rating each other as who is the most acceptable. Even within the black community, we face our own issues of colorism. As a Canadian growing up in an all-white region, I faced every day racial abuse that manifested itself as physical abuse. I heard the N-word every day of my life, and in fact, I left there at 18 years old and became an American because the racism was unbearable. There are no perfect countries. There is no such thing as no racism. There is no such thing as a utopia where there is no bigotry and no judgment based on how you look or your race or your ethnicity. Humans are tribal. Humans are sinful. And this is a sin that is not exclusive to the United States. What is exclusive to the United States is the function of our Constitution, our history, and the nature of freedom and how we look at it compared to other people. Is the United States the most racist country on earth? Yes. Until you compare it to every other nation on earth.